and OEM. Thank you for joining us today. I'm joined by Javier Pagan and also Mike Konikoff. We're going to record this webinar today where we're going to go over the new Type 1 Categorical Exclusion form. We're going to lead in with a PowerPoint kind of talking through what the changes are and what the expectation is. I'll then come back on and talk about the implementation within SWEPT, and then we'll finish with a demonstration of what the new form looks like. We are recording this session. We'll make the recording available to everybody who attends. If you would do us a favor and in the chat box, type in all the names of anybody who, besides yourself, is watching from your location. We want to make sure that everybody gets credit for attending. Even for folks that were unable to attend, again, we're recording it, and at the end of the presentation today, perhaps by the end of the day or certainly by early tomorrow, we'll send out the recording to everybody. If there are individuals that didn't register and didn't receive the email but still want to get to the recording, forward the email to them, and we'll also show you where on our website it will be uploaded to, and it'll also be accessible within the SWEPT application as well. If you have questions, type them in the chat box. We'll be monitoring them, and as they come in, we'll make sure that we answer them. So that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Javier Pagan, and he's going to start the presentation today.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to start off by discussing why we changed the form to begin with and why we're changing the process a little bit on how we do Type 1 categorical exclusions. I'm going to cover also a little bit on how and why we evaluate these impacts, how we go about doing that. We're going to talk a little bit about how the checklist works and, of course, how to document it. So the first thing that I'll cover is the fact that for FDOT over the past 20+ years, we've had a programmatic categorical exclusion agreement with Federal Highway. Well, that agreement was superseded by the NEPA assignment MOU that was signed December 14th, 2016. And although that sounds a little bit weird and possibly makes people nervous, the reality is that now we have full autonomy over how we apply these categorical exclusions, and we can take full advantage of the flexibilities provided in 23 CFR 771.117 of the federal regulation. So that was one of the reasons this has changed. We were trying to make it a lot simpler. It says there simplify self-assessment and audit process, but the reality is we were actually trying to simplify it for you all as well. The fact is the original form had yes or no questions that really didn't provide information when we're looking at documentation or doing QARs that really help us define what the analysis was, because all these projects, even though they're minor in nature, do require some level of evaluation and analysis and documentation. They are NEPA documents, even if they are small NEPA documents. So the whole purpose of the new form was to develop a standardized form that helps guide you through the process. So when do we evaluate Type 1s? The reality is most Type 1 categorical exclusions can be done during design. In other words, you have design plans and you're evaluating the design plans for impacts. You're not doing an extensive PD&E study. You're receiving design plans during the phase 1 through 4 reviews, and you're making your assessments during that time. And I say assessments because it's important to assess them just in case the project went to design and there's something major that was missed environmentally. You don't end up with a bigger problem towards the end of design. So that's why we keep emphasizing the analysis. So that environmental review process in a Type 1s, it begins basically when the analyst receives the design plans. So one of the things that we do, obviously, it's important that our analysts be able to read plans so that you're looking at things and being able to assess the design plans for the different potential impacts, whether it's species, wetlands, floodplains. Any of those issues still need to be assessed, whether a bridge permit is required, a Coast Guard permit, a Corps permit is required. That kind of information is important, and it determines whether your Type 1 CE is indeed a Type 1 or it needs to be assessed in a different fashion. So you need to understand how to read design plans. One of the things to note is that the Type 1 form was developed so that consultant preparers can prepare it or environmental specialists in the districts, but it has to be approved by an environmental manager or designee that each district must assign in the statewide environmental project tracker, which Pete and Mike will cover later in the presentation. So keep that in mind. It has to be approved by a DOT person. The class of action determination of a type 1 cannot be done by a consultant, or if it's a local agency program project, it cannot be done by the LAP agency. They can prepare the documentation but cannot approve it. So what do we do when we review the design plans? We're looking for impacts to natural resources, so again, wetlands, species, and other issues. We're trying to see if there's in-water work, those type of activities, temporary activities that may affect the environment and thus require evaluation. We're also looking for contamination impacts. And from that perspective, the DOT, obviously, contamination doesn't necessarily is an impact that we do, it's an impact that we cannot exacerbate and affects our construction more directly. So your evaluation is simply based on looking at what potential contamination sites are there so we can identify it and not exacerbate, for example, a fuel plume or something to that effect. We're also looking at issues such as Section 4F because there are certain parameters in the Type 1 form that will trigger you having to use a different type of evaluation if a Section 4F recreational resource or refuge is impacted. Same thing with 106 on the historic and archaeological sites. Certain effects will trigger you having to do a different evaluation. So it is important that you do these evaluations as you move forward, and the form is now better geared to guide you through the process of evaluating your projects and documenting them accurately. So things that we can use for determining impacts in support of the new Type 1 form is the area of interest tool and the environmental screening tool of ETDM. Or, if you don't have that or don't have access to that, you can use GIS mapping tools to help do that. Many districts do field reviews, or their consultants do field reviews, so you can use those. One of the things that's important is some of these things will require some level of determination or some level of evaluation, so keep good notes. If you have maps to reference, et cetera, those things can be used to document the Type 1 checklist.
Just talking about the area of interest tool, this is Pete. For those of you out there that may already have access to the area of interest tool, that's just an online tool within the environmental screening tool that allows you to create some geometry and run some maps and get a context of what's going on around that particular geometry. Either you can do a buffer analysis or contained within. If you do not have access to that tool, just make a request through your district environmental leadership requesting access to that tool, and we'll be happy to update your account or create an account that gives you access to that tool to perform these functions. A little bit later, you'll see an implementation of the latest Type 1 checklist form. One of the things that will be an enhancement at some point at a later date will be the ability to quickly spawn, and have access to the AOI tool, have access to that geometry and pull in those reports to automatically document and be a part of that Type 1 checklist without you having to do anything else. That's not there today, but it's something on our list that we will work towards. Today, you can have access to the tool. If you don't have an account, request an account, and then we're happy to teach how to use it. Okay.
I'm going to walk you guys through the checklist a little bit. So one of the things that's important to note is that we no longer, the DOT is going paperless even for some of our NEPA documents. So this form is exclusively done through the Statewide Environmental Project Tracker, or SWEPT, which was one of the other reasons we changed the form. It used to be a paper form with yes or no questions. We decided to create an electronic only form so that it's easier to navigate in a paperless environment. So one of the things that hasn't really changed is the project information. You still enter the same project information, the financial management number, which will trigger SWEPT, actually pre-populating material. It can draw from the work program into this, so you won't have to find it or do it. There are some fields that you will be required to fill out, and Mike's going to walk you through that a little bit later when he goes live on the form so you can see it. One of the interesting things that happen in this current form is some of the original questions were removed and were turned into verifications. There's an important point to make with that. The Type 1 CEs, as I described earlier, come out of 23 CFR 771.117, sub C and sub D. And really what those are pre-approved categorical exclusions. If you were to read the regulation when you're really bored, you can, and it will say these require no further approvals from the administration, which means by the mere fact that they're listed, they're already approved. So what the department is actually doing is not making a determination, but rather verifying that you meet the criteria for this type of categorical exclusion. So you will note that in the new type 1 form, depending on the choice of whether it's a C level categorical exclusion or a D level, you'll have 1 or 2 verifications that you will be doing in the form, and you will see that when Mike guides you through the actual form. So this is one of those verifications, and it should be relatively straightforward because, quite frankly, if you have a project that affects anything in this verification, it probably wasn't a type 1 to begin with. So that's why these are verifications. And obviously, if you can't verify that this statement is true, it won't actually go into the form. The form won't even activate past this, your ability to verify this statement. So here's one of the examples of the new questions. And like I said, this was meant to help guide things. When you have yes or no questions, it's really hard to really know what a yes means or a no means. Plus, we didn't want to have you trip out of a type 1 unnecessarily. So we turned it more into an active way of deciding what's actually happening on the project. So the Section 7 question is really, for dangerous species, is really one that's it's a good example of it. So obviously, if you have no ESA listed species present, that box is self-explanatory. It documents itself. So it's literally a no. There's nothing there. You don't have to do anything. Just check the box. With the determination of no effect, what we decided is that for documentation hiding purposes, what we want is if you check no effect, you're going to be asked to identify species that may be in the area. Same thing for if you used make that determination. And the keys we're referring to are the United States Army Corps of Engineer keys that were put out by them and the United States Fish and Wildlife Service for use. So instead of us forcing you to put a bunch of unnecessary information, if you choose a no effect, you just list the species you stated no effect on, and if you use the key to make a determination, so for example, for a wood stork, if you use the wood stork key, you would simply check that box that tells us what your determination is and just tell us that the wood stork is a species, and you've essentially documented your analysis. Now, if you go into consultation issues, and this is one of the big differences between a yes or a no, with the previous form, if you had to do consultation, you could almost have a regular project with a likely to adversely affect determination fall out of this form simply because you had to do consultation. That's not the case. Based on the actual regulation, we decided to change it so that we had greater clarity. So the reality is if you have a consultation and ends up in a may affect not likely to adversely affect, all we're asking you to do is check the box and attach the concurrence letter from the agency. And that documents that you did the consultation. The next one, if you have an adverse effect, if you are in the 3 types of CEs, 26, 27, and 28 on the C list, or I believe 9 of them listed on the D list, if you have that box where you have an adverse effect, you actually cannot continue using the type 1 form, and it will tell you that you can't use it, and it will essentially throw you out. So it'll move you, you'll have to move into a type 2 CE situation. But the reality was there is not a limitation for 1 through 25 on the regulation to fall out if you have an adverse effect. And simply what we ask is if you have 1 through 25, you're going to provide some documentation that substantiates that and talk to your OEM, product delivery coordinator, because obviously if you had an adverse effect, you have formal consultation, so it has to be documented slightly different. So we have that warning set up in the tool. So again, to go back to what the purpose of a type 1 checklist is again, it's a verification that the project fits within the pre-approved parameters listed in the regulation. Once it's completed, it's supposed to be signed by your environmental manager and it's signed electronically in SWEP. It's not physically signed. So you will do that in SWEP. Important to note that as you do work on type 1 CEs, just upload documents into your SWEP project file like you would do for any type of document. Those documents will support the conclusions in the checklist, and the checklist is being set up in such a way that if a document, support document is required, the checklist will actually queue you. It'll pop up a die that says attach supporting documentation. If it requires you to summarize something, it'll have a box that pops up that you can enter text. That box is required in some cases, it's optional in others, it's always available, but it'll guide you through when it's required, when it's not, and you'll see that when Pete and Mike talk and Mike goes live on it. In any situations where you have to consult with either OEM, the product delivery coordinator up here at OEM, or other agencies, document that as well. So that the form will guide you through all of that. Things that you can use to provide supporting documentation is obviously information you pull from the area of interest tool, any mapping, anything you use to make determinations. If you have field reviews, any notes you took that you want to put as how you documented it. So if you did a no effect and you simply want to note, we went out on a site, you know, there is no effect on this species because we drove it and there's no issue. For example, manatees. Any technical studies, any technical memos that you did in support, you would upload those into SWEP, and of course any coordination and consultation letters. And with those in particular, if a consultation is part of your documentation, the form again will cue you to attach certain documentation. So you won't have to guess at what we want, what needs to be used to substantiate. The form's going to tell you. Here's another form that's tied to this process, and this is the environmental certification form. And this is done when you're essentially completing your design. You finalize your Type 1 CE your Type 1 checklist, submitted it in SWEP, and obviously when the project is ready to go to production and be moved from essentially final plans to the next stage, you have to fill an environmental certification form. That is also done in SWEP. It is produced, and I believe SWEP sends it to federal aid for, no, never mind.
No, it doesn't do that. Actually,
my bad.
We tried to coordinate with them, and there's already a process in place where that form is included in the plans, and so they just make it part of that process.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So you will fill it out. It can be saved as a PDF, so you have it for your records, and it can be transmitted to federal aid to take care of the process. And this, again, just certifies that you've done, as part of our MOU, and actually we've been doing this in FDOT process forever, this certifies that you've met all environmental requirements prior to advancing the project to the next phase. So if you have any questions to what I just talked about, ask it in the system. If not, and you have questions when you start trying to use this, or you process questions, or how to document something, or how to analyze, evaluate something, contact your project delivery coordinator that's assigned to your district. Now I'm going to hand it off to Pete.
So just looking at the questions before we move on, and there is one question. I thought that this cert form was done automatically after an EA signs the Type 1 CE. It's not necessarily done automatically, but there is a prompt, and we'll show you that prompt. That's really not changing. It'll allow you to create the Type 1 just as it does today. And actually, a lot of the form, while the organization has changed to kind of lead towards better documentation of evaluation and determination that we're still within a Type 1, functionally how it operates really remained intact. And at the end of approving a Type 1, it'll pop up a box that says you have not completed your environmental certification, would you like to? And there's a link that allows you to do that. And that hasn't changed. And any other, all the other higher classes of action, the environmental certification still operates the same way there too. Okay, so we got a couple more questions. When filling out the ESA section, what belongs in the no effect species box? Does that include consultation areas or species seen during the field review?
It would be, that is, you're making a no effect determination, Ann, so either one would work. So if you're in a consultation area and you're making a determination of no effect, you would simply say, I'm going to use the bonneted bat as an example. If you knew that you were within the consultation of the bonneted bat and you're making a determination of no effect, you would check the box no effect and note bonneted bat. And you could document further in the comment box if you wanted to provide what you did to make that determination. So that the species listing box is exclusive to listing the species names. The comment box gives you the latitude to provide additional information. Does that help?
She said yes. Okay, a couple more questions. I have gotten the form automatically after the EA signs a Type 1 CE. Well, it should pop up with a link that says go create your environmental certification. You have to approve it. Right, and then you approve it and it shows up. One more question. Do we have to redo a Type 1 checklist that is already set up in SWEP that has not been sent for approval yet, or do we have to prepare it again in a new form? So interestingly enough, and I'm going to move on to the next section, let me get rid of this, is the answer to your question. so shifting from Javier over to me, and I'll look in the box again, see if there's any more questions real quick. But this is going to go into production on Monday, so 6/12/2017. We're going to roll it out over the weekend. You guys are seeing it today. We're asking you guys, and we've already sent emails out previously to try to complete the type 1s all the way to approval before that time. We recognize that there's other processes in place, and so if you have an unfinished, as in draft, type 1 hasn't been approved, it will continue under the previous form until you get to the point where it's approved. But once it's approved, you won't be able to withdraw it and edit it or anything like that. Once it's approved, you'll need to move on, and it'll have to be the new form from there.
Pete, before we move on, Pete mentioned this is going into production on Monday. The new chapter, the new PD&E manual chapter, Part 1, Chapter 2, will be out the 14th?
14th, got to be the 14th.
June 14th. So this will be implemented, and the manual chapter will be out a few days later. So you'll have a go-by.
Sorry. Yeah, no, you're good. One of the questions was also tied to the environmental certification. It remains intact and has not been changed. So you just process your type 1. Once you're done, it puts up a little notification window with a link that says go do your environmental cert. We'll do that. We're also adding a link to the federal environmental certification so that it shows up in the left-hand menu. I know when we rolled out non-major state action just 2 or 3 weeks ago. What's that? You said federal, the state one. No. What now? When we rolled out non-major state action a few weeks ago, the state environmental certification is already accessible on the left-hand menu. We know that it needs to also have the federal one over there as well for these types of projects, so you don't have to go through the project setup itself. And it will show up in the left-hand menu soon. It's just not there yet, just to kind of give you a heads up on that. We also talked about the fact that we're recording this, so if folks couldn't attend or couldn't connect or whatever the issue might be, they'll have access to the recording of all of this and still have the same experience. They'll even hear the questions and the answers. We've also developed a quick guide, just like everything else, something you can print out on one page to kind of go through the steps within the tool, and that's really what my next few slides are, is kind of walking through the quick guide. The quick guide will be accessible on the website. It's accessible within SWEPS. Make sure that when we send out the recording, we're also sending out a direct link to the quick guide to kind of get folks going. But functionally within the application, it really works the same. I think at this point, a lot of people really understand the skill set. You know, you start off with a type 1 FM number, you load that FM number, and once you get that number loaded, we'll start bringing up the form. Some information is going to be pulled in. You can tie it to related FMs. Your federal aid number may or may not be there, depends on the unique project. Which CE type, so whether, you know, it'll be the normal pull down, is this a C, is this a D? You want to make sure you're always selecting your one primary, you know, activity that makes the most sense given that particular project. You have a project description to provide a brief summary and the scope of the proposed work. You saw some new stuff there, which is the verified criteria. You'll notice on here that there's 2, and Mike, when he goes through the form, will show you the 2 verifications. Javier talked about it real briefly, and that's the initial verification is on all type 1s. The second one shows up if it's a C, 26, 27, 28, or you select a D. And it just walks you through whether or not you're doing that verification. Based on the selection that you choose on the C list, it operates slightly differently. So the universe on the C list that's not C26, C27, or C28 has less restrictions. There are more restrictions on C26, C27, and C28 plus the D list. And when those selections are made, based on the answers within the form itself, there's different validation that occurs. And if it's going to trip you out of a type 1 or it's going to require additional coordination, it's going to pop up and kind of guide you to that, that need. Within the answering the questions, you know, Javier hit on it a little bit. Each of the questions will, you know, identify whether or not a response is optional or whether it's required, and the tool will indicate to you whether it's optional or required and kind of lead you to the right answer. There's a different additional visual validations. You'll see a green check, just like you did in the previous form, that says you've done everything you need to do. If it's, you know, this red exclamation point, that means there's still something else you need to do on there, but it should also prompt you and show you in line what you need to complete. As you do for all of the other documents and all activities within here, you can save as draft, you can reassign it, you can send for approval. The approval process has remained exactly the same. So functionally the form has changed a little bit. How it gets approved is exactly the same. It flows exactly the same way it does now. How you attach documents is the same as well. And then, of course, at the end, that link over to the environmental certification. This quick guide is on one page. I've blown it up so we can look at it, you know, in this PowerPoint and kind of talk through it a little bit. But just like everything else, you know, you can print it on 11 by 17, the portrait, and have access to that information. Just like all the other things, I just wanted to point out where we're physically putting the videos. So this particular video will be on the OEM home site and under the training program. And then this one will reside, you know, under the SWET, which is track 2. We'll probably also put a link under track 1 as well, since it talks about type 1s. So the information will be out there on the internet. The fact that it's also being loaded on this site, they're converting them and also putting them into Learning Curve as well. So if you want to watch these videos and get credit through Learning Curve, you're a DOT employee, go through Learning Curve. It'll probably take a couple more days for our video to show up there. If you're an external consultant, it'll be out there and accessible. You can still have access to that information. So I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike, and we're going to start walking through the demonstration. Let me switch and just verify whether or not we have any additional questions in here before we switch over. Will the non-major state action checklist also change like the type 1 CE checklist?
We haven't decided that yet.
Yeah, I think that's undetermined at this point. I know I'm not working on it, whether these guys, I think there's other higher priorities right now. So the answer at this point is no. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. And I'm not sure I know which one is. I think it's this one. Yep, okay, perfect.
All right, so this is the new Type 1 form. I've accessed through the left-hand menu in SWEP. If you do have any that are hanging out with the old form, the way you'll access those is just by going to the project page. So you'd search for that FM number using the site search, and through the project page, you'd be able to access the previous form. I'm going to enter my FM number. Enter at least the item and segment number, and then click load. You'll be presented with a list of matching FM numbers, and you'll select the appropriate one. It will load. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so we can see this better. And you can see it's populated the FAP number, the work program, project description name. If you do need to make changes to that, we ask that you correct it in work program, and updates will be reflected on the site within a day, just like it does now. Same thing for work mix and county. If you do have related FM numbers, similar to what you do today, you can type those in. You just type in the first several digits, and you get a pick list, and you can add as many of those as needed and remove them with the gray X if needed. And so next, we'll choose the appropriate primary CE activity type. I believe this one was a C3. And I just took one that was done on production already so I could have some realistic data to start off with. And then we get into the note that Javier explained, some directions about what to consider, and if the project does not meet criteria, stop, this form does not apply. We'll see that on the next demo when I do a C26 form. But for this one, because it's a C3, we just have one verification: the actual not induce significant impacts to plant growth, land use, travel patterns, air, water quality, substantial or cause substantial controversy on environmental grounds. Once you verify that statement, it pulls up the rest of the form. The first several questions all work the same way. You can see the general comments are optional. So all you need to do is just pick the appropriate response within existing right-of-way, minor acquisition without relocation and/or displacement. When you see the blue dotted underline, it means you can hover over for some additional information, in this case, residential and business properties. And then the last option, any acquisitions with relocations and/or displacements, we ask that you contact your PDC here at OEM. So I'll make a selection here, and you can see that the has required documentation changed from a red exclamation to a green check, indicating we have answered the question. You can provide a general comment, but it is optional. Next is wetlands impacts. Again, you select the appropriate option: no wetlands present, no impacts, nationwide permit, general permit, SAJ 92, or standard permit. Again, contact your PDC to discuss. Bridge permits, similarly, no waterway crossing, no USCG bridge permit required, or USCG bridge permit required, contact OEM to discuss the details. Question 4, the project involves a floodplain encroachment other than functionally dependent uses, for example, bridges, wetlands, or actions that facilitate open space use, for example, recreational trails, bicycle, and ped paths. And I may not be making the correct selections for this particular project, but just to demonstrate the functionality of the form, I'm going to say no floodplain present. Question 5, we are defaulting. It is to the no listed rivers present or not within the buffer zone of the listed river. This is the question for construction activities in, across, or adjacent to a river component designated or proposed for inclusion in the national system of wild and scenic rivers. So there's only 2 of those in Florida, one in D4, one in D5. So for the most part, the answer is always going to be no, unless you happen to be working on a project near those rivers in D4 or D5. Question 6. Section 7 of Endangered Species Act of 1973 as amended. Your options are no ESA listed species present, ESA listed species present for consultation with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife or National Marine Fisheries Service. I'm going to select ESA listed species present to show you it has 2 check boxes underneath. You can check either or both. Determination of no effect, in which case you need to enter the names of the species required. And you can see, because I've entered the name of the species, my red exclamation turned to a green check mark. If I select used key as well, no consultation required, now I also need to list the species under used key, no consultation required. And I am going to deselect these and change over to consultation with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So you can see that it has 2 options here. You just pick one: may affect, not likely to adversely affect, and you'll attach a concurrence letter in that case, or may affect, likely to adversely affect. For the first option, you can attach using this button that appears beneath the option. and this works similar to the existing form. At this time, for this demo, I do have to select which question this attachment applies to, but we are going to be implementing an enhancement so that it will automatically select the appropriate question, as well as display the link and edit and delete buttons in line. Currently, this attachment, if you needed to edit or delete it, is at the bottom of the form in the documents listing. I believe by next week we will have it appearing in line to make that a little simpler for you. And then the other option, may affect, likely to adversely affect. There you need to coordinate with your OEM PDC, it's required, and document the date that you coordinated. Question 7, will the action impact any properties protected by Section 4F pursuant to 23 CFR Section 774? Your options are no potential Section 4F properties present, Section 4F resources present or adjacent, but there is no use within the meaning of Section 4F, exception or exemption, and there you'd attach the description of type and official with jurisdiction concurrence, and there's a reference to the regulation. There's de minimis and programmatic or individual Section 4F. Whichever option you select, it may have some additional inputs. So for example, Section 4F resources present or adjacent, you need to attach documentation, you need to consult with OEM and record the data consultation, as well as list the resources. For the exception or exemption option, similar set of inputs, de minimis, also has an attachment, date, and list of resources, and then programmatic or individual Section 4F, a general comment is required. Historic and archaeological resources protected under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act is question 8. You've got your set of options here, either no historic or archaeological resources present within the APE pursuant to Section 106 PA, and there's a link to the PA. And you'll be asked to provide appropriate documentation using the attach button. Determination of no involvement, determination of no effect, determination of no adverse effect, or determination of adverse effect. All of those require an attachment. The general comment is optional. Moving on to question 9, noise considerations. The project does not require you choose the second option, you have some follow-up questions. Noise abatement is not warranted, or noise abatement is warranted. In either case, you need to provide the appropriate documentation in an attachment, and comments are optional. And then finally, contamination considerations. You will check the box that the project was evaluated once it has been, and then provide a brief summary in the text box and attach appropriate documentation. So I will do that now. Pete, you want to check if we have any questions on my computer?
Sure.
I have to see the question.
Yeah, here, let me pull a couple up. We can go through.
Show the form.
They can't see it, but we can.
With the form. 8 and 2, Joe.
Yeah, okay. Let's see. Some of the questions are, what if a wetland, what if wetlands are present / adjacent, but no permit is needed? Yeah, Mike's about to.
It's easier.
And I'm going to choose C26 this time. And
Verified, and then just scroll down to the wetlands question.
question 2. Yeah, 2. Sorry.
All right. We don't have that. Oh, you would check the first box and then say that in the comments. See how it says / no impacts? So that was to the question of what wetlands are adjacent. I think you scrolled past it.
Yeah. Okay, so then, let's see.
So Samantha, that was the answer to your question, what if wetlands are present adjacent but no permit is needed? It's the first box and then describe that there were no, you check the no wetlands present / no impacts in the box, you would say there was a wetland adjacent. That's not being affected.
Okay, another question. This means minor acquisition without business and/or residential relocations. What about business sign relocations?
I think that's in 1. That I think I'll have to, it'll either fall into the first box within existing right-of-way and just describe that in the option in the box, or maybe it falls on, if you're paying business damages, I think it would fall under minor acquisition. But we'll look into it a little bit deeper and to see if we need to rephrase something. Because yeah, sign relocations can be a pain.
Okay, next question. We need to consult with OEM when there is a park adjacent, but we are not working within the park.
Question 8. Actually, the next 2 questions I think are 4F related. Oh, sorry, 7. I believe, check that one. That is just probably to describe to us what's happening. That's just a phone consultation, basically. It's nothing more than that. It's a just in case. And at some point, we will be finalizing a Section 4F no use form that'll simplify your lives anyway, so you would attach that as your document, and that's all we're doing. And that form will also be out on June 14th with the chapter.
Okay, next question. What kind of coordination is expected if there are Section 4F resources adjacent to a project corridor, but there will not be any involvement?
Same answer.
Okay. Can we send an email to the PDC notifying them that there is no use of an adjacent 4F resource, or is there another type of coordination that the PDC is requesting?
No. There will be a form that is coming out with the chapter next week that will handle that situation, and eventually that set form will be in SWEPT as well, and SWEPT will basically communicate with itself, so that
we're very good at that.
So that it'll be able to accommodate that without having too much fuss.
Please confirm if project is C list 1 through 24, then the work cannot trigger what exactly? Please repeat what you mentioned earlier.
Oh, okay. That might be it. So if it's 1 through 25, the verification that Mike just highlighted on the screen is the only verification that shows up. If it's 26, 27, or 28, you have to verify 2 different statements according to the regulation.
Yeah, if you switch it just so they can see.
So you'll see now that he highlighted 1, now he's going to switch it to
C26.
and you'll see that there's 2 verifications that now have to happen.
Okay. Why do we need to contact OEM if you have a standard corpse permit?
To make sure you're in the right CE evaluation. It used to be that when we had the yes or no questions, you could only have the general permit and the nationwide be part and still keep it a type 1. It's simply to verify that we're in the right CE evaluation, and it's not going to trigger either a focus type 2 or something different. That's all. It should be a rather quick discussion, depending on the impacts.
Okay, I think another question. What if there's a 4F resource adjacent to the project? I think we've already answered this.
Yeah.
Okay, for contamination question, will an attachment and a description be needed to move on? What if there is no involvement?
You would check the box and enter there is no involvement.
Exactly, yeah.
And they also need an attachment. What would be?
If they have no involvement, they might just say there's no sites present. So we might have to not make the attachment required if there are no sites present.
That's fine. We could require the general comment and not the attachment. Okay, another question. What kicks you out of a type 1 for right-of-way impacts? Can you obtain right-of-way and still be a type 1?
Well, if it's 26, you're in 26, right?
Yep.
If it's 26, 27, 28, or D-list project, you cannot check the last box, so any acquisition with relocation and displacement, because by the regulation, it automatically throws you out of a type 1. You cannot have that type of acquisition and still be a listed CE. If it's the other type of, if it's a minor acquisition or if it's a 1 through 25, the reason we ask you to discuss with OEM is to make sure we're doing the proper level of assessment based on the displacements you have done. So again, we're taking advantage of the flexibility provided by regulation, but we're putting in the caveat talk to OEM just to be sure we have the right level of evaluation so that there's no issues.
Can you have an adverse effect on species, use of 4F, wetland impacts, requiring standard permit and mitigation, etc., and still have a type 1? When does the form tell you that type 1 doesn't apply? Only when it's 26C, 27C, or 28C and D?
For most of those things, Mark, we put the fact that you need to talk to OEM so we can make a determination. Without knowing what those adverse effects, et cetera, that you describe are in a specific project, we can't say if it's should stay a type 1 or should be a type 2. You know, if I were to guess, it probably should be a focus type 2, but that's why we put the caveat talk to OEM. Unless you're right, if it's a 26, 27, and 28, it throws you out of that anyway. But for the other ones, just that's why we have the conversation, so we don't automatically force you to a higher level.
Are there other questions? I know Mike was going through it, but really he's shown the functionality. But if it happens to be a C26, C27, or C28, you can actually see below that as if you went through the questions and it was already one of those C's selected and or the D selected, there are certain configurations that if you select that choice, it'll pop you out. So I don't know that there's much more to show.
One other thing to mention is when you do have the condition of C26, C28, or D, and you answer one of those questions, that means it's not a type 1, the send for approval button will be disabled.
Right.
You can still save a draft of the form if you need to have a discussion and see maybe what the situation is, but you won't be able to send for approval with that case. And then assuming it's not those cases, to send for approval and approve for the data entry or PM, and District Environmental Manager works exactly like it does today. Send for approval will send an email to District Environmental Manager. They'll have a link to this form. They'll be able to review, approve. Once they do that, they'll get a confirmation message and a link to complete the environmental certification form.
right? And you can see on there the reassign. So if someone was starting to work on it and they're going to be out, they could reassign it to someone else, exactly the same functionality now. That reassign is basically picking up the information on who the preparer is. So that's why you reassign it to someone else. So in the end, they know who prepared it. That's all still the same.
So the PDF and zip buttons function the same as they do today. You can create a PDF of the draft form. When the form's approved, a PDF is automatically generated and put into the project file and available on the project page. This is relatively new. There's a filing cabinet icon that will take you to the project homepage that lists all the documents that are attached in the approved PDFs, the certification, and so on.
So I think that's what we have today. If others have more questions, this is the time to go ahead and ask them. Mark was still the last question, so we'll give you guys just a few more minutes to type. Just as a reminder, this will go into production on Monday. If you already have draft stuff started, it'll continue in the form that you already have today. I can tell you I would not expect to see a bunch of new type 1s getting started today or tomorrow. So please don't. Wait till Monday. You have ones that are already underway. That will continue. You're welcome, Jen, for the clarification. That's great. Yep, as a reminder, the full manual, all Part 1 and Part 2 will be out on Wednesday, June 14th. It'll be released. The old manual will still be accessible. It'll be sent to archive, and from the homepage, just so you know, the homepage you go to today for the PD&E manual won't change. It'll just be updated with the new manual, and then there'll be a link to the archive version as well from that site. Okay, not seeing any other questions. Thank you all for your time, and of course, if you have any additional follow-up through your PDCs. If it's technical issues with implementation on SWEPT, you can always contact us at the help desk email, which is swept@fla-etat.org, and we'll be happy to work with you guys. Great day.